Okay, there we started recording, and this will be available on our YouTube channel later in the week. So if you missed something or you want to share this webinar with other people, you're more than welcome to do that. If you would like to turn off your own personal videos to save data and for privacy, you're welcome to do that now. It won't interrupt your viewing of the presentation. And then just finally, we want to just say that donations are always very, very welcome, so that we can continue this work. And Jordan will be posting in the chat a link that you're able to click on and make a donation easily and quickly, and that would be very, very much appreciated. So nothing else from me, just to say welcome to everybody, and I'm going to be handing over to Tali to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Kath. Thank you to everyone that joined us. Again, thank you, Lizzie, for agreeing to do a part 2. It does not happen to us often, and we do have wonderful, wonderful, wonderful speakers that we cannot wait for even a year or two. We demand an immediate satisfaction and an immediate part 2, and thank you so much for accommodating us. As some of you know, and for those that don't, my name is Tali Nates. I'm the director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. We are a center of memory, education, and lessons for humanity based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And we welcome many friends, volunteers, members, supporters from our center, from the 3 centers in South Africa, the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center and the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center. Of course, we welcome our friends from all over the world. We have friends from Poland, we have friends from India, we have friends from the US, UK, Israel, we have friends from Kenya and Somalia, and actually today is Somalia Independence Day, and I would wish them a very happy Independence Day. We welcome, of course, colleagues from Yad Vashem, that we cooperate and work with for such a long time, and we partner today on this webinar with our colleagues from Yad Vashem. And special welcome to a Holocaust survivor that is joining us, survived the Warsaw Ghetto, Mrs. Wanda Albinska. And of course, welcome to colleagues from museums from around the world, universities, teachers from South Africa, and many more. It is wonderful to have Lizzie here with us today, and let me introduce her to those of you that did not listen to her before or did not join us for her part 1 webinar. Liz Elsby has worked at Yad Vashem since 2006 as a Holocaust educator and a museum tour guide. She guides educational groups in Poland, Prague, Terezin and Berlin, and as well as teaching about the Holocaust to teachers in the USA through Yad Vashem and Echoes and Reflections. And of course, Lizzie also participated in the March of the Living, and we have Professor Anna Maria Olabukowska here, and Rene Pozniak, and many others that are part of the March of the Living annual trip. Lizzie is also an artist. She is an illustrator, a graphic designer. She lives with her family in Jerusalem, Israel, and she generously agreed to share with us more about Terezin, about Theresienstadt, and about testimony through art and writing that we, of course, feature in all our educational programs in Johannesburg, and it plays a very big part of our permanent exhibition. Thank you, Lizzie. I welcome you and looking forward to learn from you today.
And Lizzie, okay, here I am. Wonderful. First, thank you for such a warm and beautiful introduction. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and back. Wait, A grüße euch for all the Litvaks out there again. All right, friends. Today we're going to do kind of a part 2 about Terezin, but if you didn't see the first part, don't worry. And I was really kind of excited when I saw your answers to the poll about the place that art has in memory. Because I really think to tell the story of the Holocaust, we can't tell the whole story in an hour and a half. We can't tell the whole story in a lifetime. We can't tell the story through facts and figures and dates and, you know, dry historical events. We have to tell the story through the first person narrative, through experience, through someone else's experience. We can understand what they went through. And some people write their experiences, artists tell their experiences through the visual, through their work. Poets write poems, people write music, tell their song, their story through music. Today we're going to focus on art and a little bit on poetry together. And what I'd like to focus on today is maybe the less known aspects about Theresienstadt, because I know in all the years I've been working as a tour guide, and I'm just going to call it Terezin for brevity's sake. Terezin is the Czech way of saying this little town, and Theresienstadt is the German way, so we're going to call it Terezin. That's for more brevity than to say Theresienstadt. It's more of a mouthful. There's a tendency to kind of remember the incredible cultural life that happened in this ghetto. The music and the art and the operas and Wunderbar and the Emperor of Atlantis, and this whole incredible intellectual, artistic, cultural fervor that happens in this terrible place. And people seem to forget what a horrible, really horrible place Theresienstadt was. And a group of artists did a type of uprising that for me is almost akin to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In Warsaw, they had the ability to fight back, using weapons, using arms, sneaking out of the ghetto, being able to bring some of those things back. And they didn't have that ability in Theresienstadt. It was a group of artists who said, the world needs to know what happened here. The Nazis can't get away with it. A future generation that most of us will not live to see needs to know what's happening here. And I think this is really their incredible legacy. So without further ado, let's jump in. Are we jumping? What are we doing? So it's doing its thing. Hey. Okay, so let me see. So first of all, we're going to talk about this little town, which is about 60 kilometers, 70 kilometers away from Prague. If you take the bus there, it takes you on a good day with no traffic. You're actually there in about 50 minutes, 45 minutes. Looks very pretty, looks very kind of, what's the word, bucolic. It doesn't look very threatening from the air. Let me take you inside the works of an artist called Petra Keen. And looking at that little town and looking at this drawing, you get a whole different perspective. I know that when I take groups to Terezin, and the first time I went there, you think, what's this, how can anything bad have happened here? It's a sleepy little provincial town, it's boring, doesn't have much to offer. There's not really any horror here. If you're expecting an Auschwitz or a Dachau, you don't see any of that here. But the story of what went on there is still kind of within those walls, and it still exists today in the artists who bore witness. And Petra Keen shows us what life was like in one little drawing. We see here people, old people, smashed and squished into roofs. We see misery, people looking out windows. We see piles of corpses in boxes here. We see people going off to work. They're thin. They look hopeless. They don't look like there's a lot of future. There's a lot of all of that in one picture. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of delve behind the buildings and see what the real Theresienstadt was like through the eyes of artists. So first of all, very briefly, the establishment of Theresienstadt in Czech Republic and what the Nazis quickly called the Bohemia and Moravia, got the word exactly, something of Bohemia and Moravia come to me in a minute, which they established in 1939 when they invaded the country, March 1939.
Protectorate.
Thank you very much. You hit your 50s, people forget it. The Protectorate, which is today's Czech Republic. they didn't set up ghettos in the way that they did in Poland. They didn't take part of Prague and make a great big wall or a barbed wire fence and force everyone into that area. They started taking away the rights of all the Jewish people. They took away the rights of children to study. They took away people's rights to work, progressively worse and worse and worse. And the Jews in that town, when the Nazis decided what they were going to start to do with the Jewish people, get them out, to move them out, to take to the place where they could be, something's going to happen to them, where they could be taken away and first put into ghettos and later on exterminated. Their fate really closely matches what happens to the Jews in Germany. First of all, they were not sent to Theresienstadt. The first transports go to Luggage ghetto. There were about 5 transports going to places like Luggage, also Riga, Kovno, and Minsk, something very similar to what happens to Jews in Germany. And to put a face to those human beings who were sent away, most of them who left nothing behind. This is a Stoppelsteiner from Periska Street in Prague. Of a little girl called Eva Abelsova. I looked her up on the transport list from the Theresienstadt initiative, and look at that beautiful little Puna, a gorgeous little girl. She was deported with her mother and father to Luggage ghetto, and she was murdered there. By the way, this is an amazing artistic initiative also, this way of memorializing the fact that someone once lived in that beautiful house that you were just passing by so casually on the streets. If you look down, they're called in English, they translate to stumble blocks. You stumble over them and you realize that there was a life that lived in this house once that was taken away and murdered because of hatred. But this isn't quick enough. Sending all the Jews off to Luggage ghetto is not quick enough. The Jews are still in Prague. And the Nazis come up with a plan to send the Jews not to the east, not to Poland, not something that seems scary and would send them away to a different country in a way, but to send them closer to home, to an old garrison town that had been established. If you look at this map here, the old garrison town was actually established in 1780. It's very close to the border with Germany. It's very close to what the Nazis called the Sudetenland, what was called the Sudetenland, that they take over in 1938. And there it is, not too far away from Prague. And it's an old garrison town, and that's the place they're going to be sent. And for many Jews in Prague, and there was a very big Zionist movement in Prague, the idea was, we'll be able to ride it out here. Whatever happens, it'll toughen us up, it'll make us more, ready to face what's coming in the future. There's no mass murder in 1941 of Jews in places like Auschwitz. We'll ride out whatever happens here, and at least we're in our country. And by the way, this is a little aside, it's called in the name of Empress Maria Theresa, one of the renowned anti-Semites in history. She makes the familial, doesn't get rid of the familial law in Prague. This is, can marry so they wouldn't have any children. She throws the Jews out of Prague in the 1740s. It takes them a few years till they're allowed back in. And she has the eternal monument to her anti-Semitism of having Theresienstadt named after her by her son. So there she is. And this is what the place looked like. This is an old garrison town that had been built in the 1780s. It was supposed to stop attacks on Prague. It didn't work because you could just kind of go around it, and thus it was kind of obsolete before it was even finished. And by the 1900s, it was already being used as a little town, a kind of a little provincial town. It also held parts of the Austrian-Hungarian army, and the Wehrmacht actually stops here and spends a little time here when they take over the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. So little tiny place out in the middle of nowhere. Up on the top are kind of the hills and the mountains of a place called Lida Marice. For all my Czech friends, please excuse my horrible pronunciation. Doesn't look particularly threatening, doesn't look like a place when you see it today that anything horrible happened. And I just want to show you just a few of the statistics before we get into the real nitty gritty. 148,000 Jews were transported to Terezin. Did you see the size of that little tiny town? Before the war, there were about 7,000 people living there. That included also people who lived in the town and part of a military garrison. Even put 148,000 Jews are going to be transported at different times. 74,000 of them came from the Protectorate, because that's one of the reasons this place was set up as a place to send the Jews from Bohemia and Moravia. Another reason this was set up was a place to send Jews from Germany, especially elderly people. Terrible tragedy in this whole story, which we'll talk about soon. And also by 1943, 44, it's going to be a place that's going to be kind of a subterfuge, a way of kind of covering up the Nazis' crimes. It was a ghetto, it was a concentration camp, and it was a transit camp, all mixed into one. Not one of those really defines it for exactly what it was. It was a concentration camp because it was run by the SS. Transit camp because some people only spent, believe it or not, a week in this terrible place before they were shipped off to be murdered. And it was a ghetto because people still were able to have some kind of contact with their families. There was still a little bit more freedom, if you will, than you would have had in a place like Dachau or Auschwitz-Birkenau. So of the 88,196 prisoners who were sent here, 3,800 would live to see liberation, and almost all of the children who were sent here, only about 142, the number is disputed, survived. The maps you see here, the charts you see here are fascinating because they're going to open up our whole discussion. They were made by imprisoned Jews who were artists who start to work in an art workshop. The Nazis are smart. They have these brilliant, talented people among the Jews who were sent there. They said, we're going to use them. We can use their talents. And they set up workshops. One of them is called the Technical Workshop, where these things come from. One of them was a place called the Lauscher Workshop, which was a place where Jews were forced to kind of make pretty pictures showing how nice Prague was, Terezin was, that were forced to draw copies of the Mona Lisa and pictures of, of greeting cards for SS men to send home to their families. They were forced to make little knickknacks for the SS men to use. So there were two of those workshops. The work I'm showing you right now comes from the Technical Workshop. The Nazis love these charts. They love showing their bosses. At the beginning, you want to impress the bosses. They're not trying to impress the world yet. Look how good we are at running this place. Look how we've set up a Jewish council, and under our auspices and our iron hand, they are making the place run. It's viable. It's got industry. It's really good for us, the Nazis. So on the left, look at this beautiful chart. It shows the places that people arrived to this camp from. This is from 1943. So we have the Reich, the Ostmark, which is Austria, the Protectorate, which is Bohemia and Moravia, Denmark, and Holland. These are the countries from where they came from. And here, another one of the brilliant artists we're going to talk about, Leo Haas, shows us these kind of art slaves. Look at this little room. Here they are drawing. Look how squished in they are. I could tell you as an artist, being elbow to elbow with other artists, trying to concentrate, not spill your ink onto their drawing, getting their erasing clippings all over your drawings. It's kind of nerve-wracking. Here they are creating these charts for the Nazis, this work for the Nazis, but many of them are going to steal paper and pencil. And they're going to say, all right, we have to do what they want during the day. They're not going to get away with it. We're going to show the true horror of this place. And I want to show you a brilliant example of that. And this artist we're going to be following again and again. We talked about him last week. His name was Frederick Fritta. He's really one of my idols. He's a brilliant cartoonist and artist from Bohemia and Moravia, from Prague. And when he's sent here on what's called the Aufbau Commando, first they send 2 commandos of young men when they realize they're going to use this, which is in a terrible state of disrepair. The Wehrmacht had been in, and there's lice, and there's fleas, and there's dirt. The big garrison buildings hadn't been used, really, kept up. There's no beds for thousands of people to come into. There's barely any running water. The place is a mess. So these 2 groups, that are called the Aufbau Commandos, are sent in already November 1941 to prepare the place. And this is the artwork he creates for the SS. Look at us, we're in our beautiful work outfits and we're creating this beautiful camp, and look at the workmanship and the precision, and wonderful. This is the real Belagan of what's going on there. This doesn't actually depict the Aufbau Commando. It depicts one of the crazy things that happens in this ghetto again and again and again. The Sudeten barracks, which have been used as for mass housing for thousands of people. The Nazis decided we need this barracks now for an archive, which meant thousands of people had to scurry out of there, had to take all the building materials they could get, anything they could use to create another barracks and try and squish all these people in. Look at the mess here. Look at the craziness here. This is not something you want the SS to see. This is something you want us to see. Look at the conditions they force us to live in. Look how people have been reduced to ants, running back and forth. Look at the materials we have to work with, the rickety old wood and the rotting place. This is what he wants the world to see. So we have these like two sides, the official side for the Nazis, and the side that will eventually get this man sent to Auschwitz, where he's going to die of illness and dysentery in 1944, the side to show what's really happening. So we'll begin with getting there with transports. And Leo Haas, one of these brilliant artists, draws a series of drawings secretly. And what I'm going to show you is the drawings he makes already in 1944, and etchings that he created from those drawings in the 1960s. So the etchings that I'm going to be showing you are based exactly on drawings like this, and there is an etching of this drawing that he kind of recreates in the 1960s. Look at this arrival. And what's fascinating about his work, I love how he loves to contrast this SS man. Look at him, warm, wearing his uniform. Notice that stance with the legs splayed apart, smoking his cigar, barely noticing these poor people tumbling out of this cattle wagon. Half of them are dead, falling on the floor, elderly people. There's people trying to help them off. It's pouring down rain. People are looking out the window. It's a horrible arrival. For most of these people, in 1942, they did not arrive into the ghetto. The railway tracks are not extended into the ghetto until 1943. So for a year and more, those people who are arriving to this camp, and that's going to include a huge influx of elderly people from Germany and Austria in the fall and summer of 1942, are going to have to walk from a town called Bohusovice nad Odrze. It is about 2.5 kilometers away, which doesn't sound like much, but if you have a 95-year-old little grandma, look at the people here dragging her umbrella. If you have a heavily pregnant woman, if you have people who have been living in, with a lot of hunger in Prague and Brno and are not in the best physical condition, having to walk on a mud track from Bohusovice into the ghetto is an ordeal. Many people don't survive it. And Leo Haas kind of captures that moment as they're walking. And let's look at this picture. We see this pregnant woman, we see a nurse, we see the husband behind schlepping the belongings of the family, not knowing any of these poor people that most of these things are going to simply be confiscated from them once they arrive in the camp. They're going to go to a place in English that's called the sluice, and everything's going to be taken away from them, except for bare minimum clothing. Anything additional is going to be taken away. And in this whole miserable procession, there's a very interesting title to this. It's called SS Dog. And notice where the emphasis here is. We have the SS man kind of peeking, if everyone kind of looks in the middle of the drawing, this etching. He's in dark, he's in shadow. It almost looks like Darth Vader. We have the SS dog, who's been reduced to doing the work. Open to interpretation, as all art is. I don't see him as a very threatening dog. I see him as kind of barely keeping up with them. Other people may see him as some kind of growling, snarling animal. The question is, who is the one who's really acting in a bestial way here? Is it the people who are forcing human beings to do this? Or the dog, usually who's supposed to be a pet and supposed to be a friend of man, who is kind of hurting this whole scene? And one thing that I think is always really beautiful is that child looking at us, getting us, catching us right there. And when you look at a piece of art, you have to ask yourself, who am I? As I stand here and observe the piece of art, who am I to this child? Who am I that I'm looking in this scene? Am I a person who's taking part? Am I a fellow Jew? Am I an SS man? Am I someone from the future as we are coming to bear witness? Who are we? So we see people are already enter Theresienstadt in a bad state. This is another one of Leo Hasse's drawings. I'm sorry, I had the title here. I think I put the title down, sorry. Leo Hasse's from his etchings that he makes in the 60s based on the original artwork. Look at these people who are just too sick to actually walk from Bohusovice into the ghetto. And there's a corpse that came off the train because every single person, even if they're dead, has to be brought and accounted for. You see part of the people, the feet are sticking up, people are sitting on the corpses. The luggage is hanging off, these poor people being taken in to this ghetto. This is another one of his drawings. You can imagine this scene. This is one of the only streets in the ghetto that wasn't like heaving with people because the Nazis actually cut this street off so they could kind of protect the little administrative area for themselves. We'll talk more about that later. And this is a constant going in and going out. Groups of people huddled together coming into the ghetto, groups of people huddled together coming out of the ghetto. The SS man with his legs splayed watching, and above everything else, the flag of the Third Reich proudly in the sky there. All of this is because of that flag and that ideology. Now, just a little to set another misconception about Theresienstadt. People often say that everyone in this ghetto was sent to Auschwitz, and that is simply not true. From 1942 to October 1942, anyway, in that time period, I can't see because it's blacked out, from January to October 1942, all of the transports went to other places in the East. The first transports went to Riga. They went to places when you drive through Poland and from one place to another. The Nazis shipped the Jews off to Nazi-occupied Poland, to far-off places like Izbica and Zamość, and the death camp of Sobibor, and Minsk, and Mali Trotsynus, the terrible, terrible camp that was set up near Prague. Not Prague, excuse me, near Minsk, and almost nobody survived there. Almost as many people were murdered, according to historians in Mali Trotsynus, as were murdered in Majdanek. And 10 transports sent off to Treblinka. Of the 42,500 people who were sent off in these first transports, 224 people survived. 224 people survived. That is 1/2 of 1% of all of those deported. The rest of the transports after that went to Auschwitz. But that is something I think it's very important to remember. We owe it to those people who were sent to these other terrible places. Some of them who may have only been in Terezin for a week, 2 weeks, children who were separated from their parents, who were only in this ghetto alone for a week before being sent off to die a horrific death in Mali Trotsynus. We see that in this. And the rest is the deportations to Auschwitz. And you see there were a few that were sent to Bergen-Belsen. And we will talk about this very special transport in white, the transport of Bialystok children, which we will talk about later on in the talk. Well, here they are building the railway spur into Bohusovice, and it was built in the summer of 1943, excuse me. And look at the laborers. Look at them. They're half dead elderly people having to do this back-breaking work of extending a railway spur from Bohusovice into the camp. And now people are going to be arriving into Terezin itself, also being sent off. And Bedřich Frita makes this incredibly evocative drawing. It's called Abandoned Luggage. And I'm sorry it's a little grainy when you see it here. It has such a presence. Here we have these little bags of luggage, which look very similar, if anyone has visited the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, to the displays of the baggage of the suitcases that you see in the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. Many of those things came on the last transports. Some of the last transports there were from Terezin, from Theresienstadt. But there they are. The people who they belong to have been sent away. Their names have been reduced to some kind of number. If you look at the bags, always there's these trees kind of bearing witness, these kind of scary trees. The place itself seems to have a presence, the presence of loss. Where are they going to? What happened to them? And these are the bags that they couldn't take along, just sitting there waiting for owners who will never come back. Let's talk about life in the camp now. We talked about how we got there. And here we begin, that long road walking into the camp. Almost every single inmate who arrived in the camp people who survived remember this terrible incident. And this is if he said that Theresienstadt, even though it had a Jewish council of elders, it was run by the SS. It's one of the reasons that we call it a concentration camp also. And they wanted the inmates to know, your fate is still in our hand. You may have a Jewish council, you may be trying, we may be giving you permission to do things yourself, to run this place, seemingly yourself, but we are in charge of everything. And on January 10th, 1942, new coming prisoners remember a horrible scene. This is the day after the first transport takes off to Riga. A group of 9 young men who did the horrific crime of writing letters home to their parents are rounded up and they're hung in public, and everyone has to come out and see it. It is a warning. Don't toe the line. Think you know what you can pull one over on us. This is what's going to happen to you. And look at the pictures on the side. You can't quite see them. Maybe you guys can. But you see these people with their heads bowed. They can't believe what they're seeing. And look at the gloating SS men. Look at them. Look at this one here with that wolf-like look. Again, the splayed legs, the snappy uniforms. They're bestial, they're animal looking, and these huddled masses of people being forced to watch it. Once people actually get into Terezin, the barracks themselves, the place is so overcrowded. We'll talk about that soon. Horrible conditions. If you visited Terezin, you may have gone to the Magdeburg barracks to see reconstruction of what the barracks were like. This artist called Nagel, murdered in 1944, took it upon himself. He makes scene after scene after scene of the living conditions. There's something about them that I always find very, very touching. You have to imagine, first of all, we don't see the people in these pictures. Overcrowded. Can you imagine people trying to sleep in these beds? Elderly people climbing up those ladders. There's no place to sit up in the bed. These are people who had homes. These are people who had lives before. These are people who had some kind of dignity before the Nazis took over. All of that has been taken away from them. And everywhere we look, it's not really normal unless you live in a one little tiny room apartment. And even then you try and hide it, that we kind of live with our luggage all over. Look at the luggage everywhere. There's always that reminder that this may not be permanent. The next transport, you may be on it. So your whole life is reduced to this living space, these 3-tiered bunk beds, for the beautification of 1944, which we'll talk about soon. And the Nazis actually forced the Jews to cut the top bunk bed off to make them look more according to is it the Geneva Convention? No, how people are supposed to be living decently. But this is the conditions. This one is always kind of touching to me too, because I could tell you as an artist, when you create a drawing or a painting, it seems like he's trying to create order in his own head here. Notice how clean and neat everything is. Everything is hanging in a row. Everything is packed just so. There looks maybe a talit hanging there. It's a reminder that there still was religious practice in this ghetto. Many Jews who were not so religious, and most Jews from Czech Republic were not. There was no Hasidic movement there. They weren't like the Jews from the great Hasidic towns of Poland in the east. Many people kind of came back to their Judaism in this camp. They said, if this is being persecuted because we're Jews, what does it mean to be Jewish? Maybe I should explore that, even in a terrible place like this. So we have, it looks kind of like a talit. And look at the conditions again. But he didn't want to show these as filthy, dirty places. I think he wanted to paint it to give them a little bit of dignity. Now, he's very clinical. There's no, it's not fussy. There's no emotion here. But I think he wants to give them that little bit of dignity, even though they have to live in such a horrible place. Look how clean they are. Look how neat they are. And what are the people doing in these places? These places are filled with lice. They're filled with fleas. People get very good at killing fleas in Theresienstadt. They turn the electricity off at night. I don't know why they do that, but the electricity is often turned off at night. It goes without saying there's no heating. And I go to Terezin in the winter sometimes. It's freezing. The conditions are appalling. People have to wait in line for food. People have to wait in line for the few showers. It's always waiting in line. There's always people everywhere. It's constant people coming and going. It's hell on earth. Joe Spire, who is a Dutch artist, I love his illustration. Draws this picture, View from a Window in 1943. He's a fascinating artist because he's going to be called upon by the Nazis, forced to create a booklet of little scenes and vistas of what a beautiful place Theresienstadt is for the International Red Cross visit of June 1944. But here he shows us View from a Window. And what an uncomfortable room. We've got stinky, smelly socks hanging there. Someone washed them out of the sink. There's all kinds of pots and cups and suitcases. And outside, presiding over all of it, like a warning, looking through the window, is the flag of the SS. Fleischmann, Dr. Karl Fleischmann, another brilliant artist who was not only a doctor, a dermatologist, but was also quite an accomplished artist. He created his own kind of avant-garde art group in Prague before he was sent to Theresienstadt. Has a very different way of showing this kind of frenzied drawings that are kind of wavering and these massive beds, and the people who are made dwarf-like to these massive beds up and down the ladders, these groups of all this clothing hanging there, no way to breathe. It's an incredible way of seeing these rooms, also very different than what we saw with Nagel. This poor artist is going to be one of the artists, also one of the 5 artists who was sent to, sorry, there's my son, sent to Theresienstadt to Auschwitz for making horror propaganda in 1944, and he actually does not survive. I don't think he actually gets to Auschwitz. I think he died in the little fortress they were sent. And Breivik Frita also shows us the people themselves. Look at the overcrowding. Look at the old people, the young people, the children. Children are living in these horrible conditions. Someone's wearing a kippah, Jewish head covering here. The light of the room is illuminated by this one candle. The electricity is turned off. This place is spread out. You're exposed to everyone else's coughs, and there you are. And this is what's happening all over the ghetto. And with Bandi, the incredible journalist and writer, also survivor from Theresienstadt, one of the great voices of this ghetto, who sadly passed away recently, talked about the hard work, the nerve-wracking, endless standing in queues, home before the curfew, the fear of transports, mourning the death of a parent, all of these things were needed strength, first of all, for a day-to-day existence. And hanging in the background of all of this is the threat of the transports. So it's not only trying to get through your daily routine, it's knowing that your name might appear on the transport list and then you'll be taken away. Another incident that is indelible in the memory of anyone who survived the camp is what they call it in German, the Spire, the counting. And that happens November 11th, 1943. What do I mean by this? By November 11th, 1943, there had already been uprisings in many places in Poland. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising had happened. The uprising in Bialystok had happened. Other places in Majdanek, they had taken a kind of been so scared that there wouldn't be an uprising in Majdanek that they murdered all of the Jews in that camp in a thing called Operation Ernstefest, November 3rd, 1943. The Nazis wanted to count and make sure that everyone was still in the ghetto, that they weren't plotting anything, and that no one had escaped, which is kind of insane when you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So what they did is they took the entire population of the ghetto, except for some people who were incredibly old or women who had just given birth. And you can see a little thing of baby carriages here. And they marched them out to a place called the Bohusovice Hollow, which is near where the gas chamber and the crematoria and the cemetery is, the mass graves. And they were forced to wait from early morning until 10 at night in freezing cold conditions. Now, if you're trying to count all of those people who were scared and sick and elderly people and babies in baby carriages and little kids, you're not going to get an exact tallying. They have to keep counting and doing it at least 3 or 4 times. People are dying. People are falling over and freezing. People haven't eaten anything all day. This is November in Czech Republic. And one of the witnesses is Zdeněk Ornes, a little boy who takes part in the magazine Vedem. And he writes this excerpt. He said, "We stood there numb with cold, starving and exhausted for a full 12 hours. We could hear the sick calling out, the small children crying, old people fainted, and we shifted from one foot to the other uncertainly. What will they do with us next?" Someone asked. Nothing. No one knew. We thought that this time they would leave us here to die of hunger and cold. There were 30,000 of us, 30,000 people. And yet there was nothing we could have done in our impotence. We had no weapons, and they would have gunned us down. We were all very weak as well. I'm going to show you another artist. I'm going to show you some examples of a few artists who record the same exact event, which is amazing. Because if you want to have accuracy, historical accuracy, you get different people recording on the same events from their own perspective and how they lived through it. You're kind of getting one picture, one cohesive picture. This is the great artist Felix Bloch, who was also among the artists who was considered an artist making horror propaganda, the Terezin Art Affair, July 1944. He was taken with Fleischmann and Friedrich Frieda and Leo Hatz and Unger and the art dealer Stas and I forget the other name, and then one other architect, and they're taken to the little fortress. Those who survived that with their families, those who survived that were sent to Auschwitz. Only Leo has survived. Felix Bloch did not. But he also shows, look at the scope. 30,000 miserable men, women, children, babies sitting in this freezing cold weather while they're counted again and again and again. People saw the absurdity in this too, and I think that's something amazing, this ability of human beings to still try and find some kind of sarcastic response. And one of these was a great artist called Pavel Fanto, and he kind of records these very cynical, sarcastic, almost kind of funny views of the ghetto. He also does not survive. He died murdered in 1944. This is, can't see on the top, this is Christmas in Theresienstadt. So we have upon arrival in 1941. And many Czech Jews, very similar to many Jews in Soviet Union, even though they were Jewish, often had a Christmas tree, kind of a New Year's tree in the house. So here he is in 1941, fat, red-cheeked, healthy, his bed has white sheets on it, his belongings are full, the little Christmas tree there has some lights on it, it's in a wine, an empty bottle of some kind of alcoholic drink. But 1942, he's losing his hair, he's getting thin, his clothing is patched, the bed is in disarray until we get to 1944, when he's simply wearing rags, there's no longer bedding on the bed, there's no longer belongings, and it's called Metamorphosis. And I think that's also a homage to Franz Kafka, the brilliant Czech Jew who writes the book Metamorphosis. Another absurdity in this ghetto, and we look at these things from 2020, and the absurdity is this, and the Jews there were aware of this absurdity, and they capture this also. This artwork on the left was created by a brilliant artist called Petra Keen. Really, this could have been one of the great artists of the 20th century. Had he not been murdered at the age of 25 in Auschwitz. He's working in the technical division, and he illustrates a whole series of pamphlets showing conditions in the ghetto. The Nazis set a bank up. They set the bank up in January 1st, 1943. Bank, which is kind of credible because people don't have any money, but they want to make this place look normal. And how do you make this place look normal? You create a phony bank that has over 30 bank clerks and people working in it. And Jews get paid in what's called Moses Kronen, Moses coins, Moses crowns. What can you buy with Moses crowns? Zippo. You can pay off your library fees. I've read somewhere you could buy a condiment here and there. It's really worth nothing. So this is the official, on the left is the official pamphlet that they put out, and Joe Spire, the Dutch artist, for this little gift pack he makes for the visiting IRC, International Red Cross. Here's the Jewish Self-Administration Bank, 1944. It's really a load of beep. But I want to share one fascinating story about this. First of all, this is the money, the Moses Kronen, and there's a lot of this stuff still around. They printed thousands and thousands and thousands of these in different denominations. And notice that the figure on it is Moses, because Jews are so one-dimensional. The only person they can relate to is Moses. That's the person who, and they asked the artist Petra Keen, the one who made the drawing on the left, to draw the Moses so that it could be sent to Prague and engraved. And he draws a very handsome Moses. Moses, this great figure. And there's Petra Keen on the left there. And the Moses he draws, you can kind of see here on the left, is a very handsome patriarch. Here he is, the 10 Commandments. They say that when it gets to the engravers in Prague, it has to be improved. And one of the high up Nazi officials, some people say it was Reinhard Heydrich himself, sees this and he says, this is no good. That Moses is too handsome. Everyone knows Jews are ugly. Everyone knows Jews have big noses. Everyone knows Jews have black curly hair. Everyone knows Jews. And I hope you could see the Moses on the right because he's kind of covered with the little screens. That is the revision. And here, I'll show you him in the money here. And I can tell you as a graphic designer, when you have a client who's driving you a little nuts and you make 100 different revisions, sometimes you just do it like dafka. All right, he wants this to look absurd. He makes it as absurd as he can. And there it is, the new Moses on the Moses Cronin. And again, Petra Keen, brilliant artist, librettist, poet, murdered in Auschwitz at the age of 25. Now, this was a place they sent most of the Jews from, majority of the Jews from Bohemia and Moravia, the Protectorate. Plan 2 was also to use it as a retirement settlement for German and Austrian Jews. And that's decided upon in the infamous Wannsee, January 1942. Maybe some of you have visited the house in Wannsee near Berlin. It's a little less important than we used to think. This is not the place they had decided from this moment on. Mass murder had already begun in the summer and fall of late summer and fall of 1941 in the Soviet Union when they started shooting the Jews of the Soviet Union. The camp of Chelmno was already up and running in late December 1941. But at this point, they're going to legalize the whole process. It's become illegal. And it's going to be, from this point on, the Jews are going to be sent to the East, never to return. One of the things they decided on is they're going to use this place as a cover-up for a sticky problem. And the problem is, what do you do with elderly people, elderly Jewish people? What do you do with decorated war heroes? How do you tell the German public, those who are actually interested, what's happening to their friends and neighbors who are being sent away? Why are you sending away my upstairs neighbor? Oh, she's being sent away to work in the East. My upstairs neighbor is 95 years old. What kind of work is she going to do in the East? Or, oh, you're sending the neighbor from downstairs away to work. Oh, yes, he's going to be working in the East. That neighbor was wounded in World War I. He lost both his feet, his legs. He's blind. What kind of work is he going to do? So first of all, I just want to show you some of the beautiful faces of these grandmas and grandpas, these old folks from Czech Republic, from Germany. These are the people we're talking about. And in Germany and Austria, they do something very, very cynical and very, very, they tell old folks, listen, we're moving you to a retirement town, to a spa town in Czechoslovakia, in Czech Republic, a place that had spa towns. And you're going to be giving up your apartment in Berlin for this beautiful apartment in the spa town. And they make these poor people sign these house purchasing contracts, which are in German, perfectly legal. And when you look at them, this one is hard to see. They say things like they're promising them good linen, they're promising them 3 hot meals a day, medical care, all of these wonderful promises. Sign here on the dotted line. Some of these poor people actually have Alzheimer's and they have someone signing it for them. Once they sign away everything they own in their life, they are sent to a place in Mita, kind of a waiting room in Mita, so they can get enough people together on Grosse Hamburgerstrasse. And from there, many of these people have to walk, in some cases to this platform 17 here, they have to walk almost 7 kilometers through the city of Berlin in front of everybody. Can you imagine this parade of elderly people with their little bundles, people who had served in the German army, people who had been good Germans, people who felt more German than the Germans, being sent away because they're Jewish. And in this this impressive memorial in Platform 17 in Berlin, they have all the transports from Germany onward. And the majority stopped first in Theresienstadt. And I did some research to find out some of the names of the people on the transports. It wasn't enough for me just to see the transport, because that's just a train. I wanted to see who the people were. I want to show you the ages of some of those people deported from Berlin to Terezin on those transports. We have Johanna Gumpel, who was 95 years old. She was born in 1847. She was murdered in Terezin. She hung on, the poor thing, for 5 months. Can you imagine the conditions she was hanging on to? Herman Goldstine, also born 1853, a Victorian man, and he's murdered at the age of 89. And this is another one of those illustrations done for the Nazis by Petra Keen in his capacity as a graphic designer for the technical division. And it shows us October 1942, and it says over 32,788 people in the ghetto were over 66 years old. 16 to 55-year-olds are 17,715 persons, and 0 to 15 years is 2,761. In October 1942, the majority of people in this terrible place were elderly people, most of them alone, nobody to help them, in a strange country, without their families, in these terrible living conditions. And look at these conditions. This is another drawing by Petra Keen of the little buildings that served as shops and houses before the war. Look how people are living. Look at the overcrowding in this terrible, terrible place. And Leo Haas draws where many elderly people are living. They're living in old, rundown shops, which everything is, they're not selling anything in this ghetto, so the shops themselves are being used as places to house elderly people. And look at the conditions. Another artist, Ernst Morgenstern, who never worked with the technical division. He was so scared of what he was doing, he worked by himself. And this man had no artistic training. He was a lawyer for the Czech army. And he was so appalled by what he saw in the ghetto, he started secretly making artwork. No formal art training. After the war, he never picked up a pencil and never drew again, but he left an amazing testimony of what he's seeing. And these people are living in like a bakery. Look at the conditions here. There's no privacy. The little old ladies have to get washed and undressed. Look at the barracks behind them. This is what they've been reduced to in their old age. Leo Haas shows us the conditions these poor folks are living in the attic. They don't even have a place to lie down. I think, one of the most painful things in the world is when you see elderly abuse. You see sometimes a nursing home has abused elderly people, which is horrible. In the current things we're going through right now, there's so much of the coronavirus that is striking elderly people in homes where they're supposed to be protected and live with dignity their last days. All dignity has been stripped from these people. Here they are living in these horrible conditions. And Elisa Scheck, who was a young girl at the time, talked about this. She said these old people were really a nightmare to all of us. They were the ones who were starving the most, had the worst swellings, were sick continuously, and were naturally dying. Every day, scores of them died. We saw them sitting around on benches, dressed in their city clothes with hats and knitted gloves, somehow pretending to live a normal life. It was all so pathetic and horrible to see them sitting there, engaged in conversation, formally addressing each other as Herr Professor and Frau Doctor. They were all lonely here. Their families had either emigrated or been deported. When I have nightmares, it's just about these old people. They were completely lost. Another drawing by Leo Haas. This is one he makes in the ghetto. This is a etching. Look at the conditions. Look at those horrible bunk beds. Look at this little grandma. Can you imagine her trying to climb up that ladder to get into that bed? People have urine tract infections, people are cold, blind people, and this is the conditions. I talked about Marit Moeller last week. He was this artist, also was an art appraiser, who volunteers to work in the urology department, this urology hospital, of elderly people who have simply have got some kind of urological disorder, and there's no treatment. Either terrible urine tract infections, kidney disorders, whatever. They're basically left in this little hospital to die. And he does something incredibly human. He says, these people were once people of dignity. They were once somebodies. Now they're lying here anonymously in a bed. Nobody comes to visit them. They're stinking of urine. They're going to die soon. And he goes and draws hundreds of portraits of these people to give them a little bit of human dignity, to remember that they were once somebody. He sat with them. He talked with them. He spoke with the nurses who have, you know, there's this uphill battle of trying to save these poor people with no medicine and no facilities. And he captures them for us to see and remember in 2020. He himself was murdered in 1944 in Auschwitz. And it gets to a point where there are just too many elderly people in Theresienstadt. It's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? And if you saw that list I showed you before, those 10 transports called the Untitled Transporte happened in the fall of 1942, deporting elderly people to Treblinka death camp in Poland, Nazi-occupied Poland. This pie chart is amazing, because when you see here, the largest amount, that big orange part, are 1,343 women from the ages of 66 to 85. The blue part are women who are older than that. Most of these people were elderly Jewish women sent away on these transports to be murdered. Of all the people sent away to Treblinka on these out the transporta, only about 3 of them survived. One of them was the famous Richard Glazer, who takes part in the uprising in Treblinka in 1943. By the end, they also squeezed some old people on these transports to Treblinka. It's something that most people do not associate with Treblinka, that transports came from Theresienstadt to Treblinka to murder them. And this drawing, that's just really heartbreaking. Before the transport, there she is, the little grandma, reduced to nothing, sitting on her little bundles. It's not important for Bedřich Vita to make realistic shadows. It's really interesting. The shadows kind of serve his purpose of highlighting the Jewish star on her chest, kind of obscuring her humanity on her face, who she is. Her hands are kind of knotted, and there she is sitting in no space before she will be taken away, transported to be murdered. One brilliant woman from this ghetto is Ilse Weber. I could talk about her for so much, but Ilse Weber was a brilliant a musician, a writer. She wrote children's books. When she makes a terrible decision, she has 2 little boys. One of them, her little boy Hanus, she manages to get out with Sir Nicholas Winton. He gets on the kinder transport, and she and her little boy Tommy are sent to Theresienstadt. She works with young children in the ghetto, writes beautiful music. Look up Ilse Weber, everybody. She'll blow your mind. But she's also there with her husband and her mother. And her mother is put onto a transport to the east. There's her mother on the left, and there's Ilse with her 2 beautiful boys. Ilse will be murdered in Auschwitz with her little boy in her lap. And she writes this song, Goodbye Mother. And it's written in German. The translation isn't so great, but it really, I think, sums up this experience of losing someone you love to be transported. How do you even stand up to it? What is your choice? She says, I've always loved you since I was a child. Such good friends we were. I feel it now more than ever. Yet I let you go today without extending a hand, for your distress all alone for the first time in your life. I saw you from among the crowd, a bundle on your back, stunned and ill at ease, searching for my face. From the distance, I could hug you only with my eyes, too cowardly to run up to you and slip in by your side. I saw you and the others pass through the barracks gate, tormented and without a home, off to an unknown fate. She couldn't say goodbye to her mother. I didn't say goodbye to you, and you may never know that even as I deserted you, I never felt so close. This is one of the brilliant voices of Theresienstadt, murdered upon arrival in Auschwitz. And that brings us to children. And if you see these young men here, what an incredible generation these guys were. They're being sent to the ghetto. These are young men who've taken on themselves to be educators. And women. Sorry, there's only men here, but women also. How do you teach children who were traumatized? How do you teach children from different backgrounds who speak different languages, who have different levels of education? How do you teach some children who have learning disabilities, some children who may even have some kind of mental illness? How do you do it? And the majority of the falls on the shoulders of Egon Redliff. He arrives with those very first transports of the Aufbau Commando in November 1941. And they set up a series of secret schools. You can't have schools in this ghetto. The Nazis don't want them educating children. It's obviously why. You don't want educated Jews. You don't want this hope. You want these people to kind of, roll up in the corner and attack each other like feral cats. You don't want to teach children. They're going to teach them anyway. Most of the children in the ghetto had some kind of secret clandestine education, sometimes usually for 4 hours a day. It's an amazing testimony to these educators, most of them who were murdered. They set up children's homes for older children because the parents had to work. And you can't have kids just milling around in this place with no structure. So it was the Jews who set up children's homes. This was the home for boys. Today it's the Museum of the Terezin Ghetto, those of you who have been. And this was called Boys Home 101. And I just want to show you what these boys are doing. They're living together. You can imagine these poor kids. Many of them are separated from their parents. Some of them, if they only had one Jewish parent, were sent here by themselves. Can you imagine sending a 13 or 14-year-old by himself to a place like Terezin? They're sad, they're scared, they don't know what's going to happen to them. They have to live with all these strangers. And somehow they set up the framework that these kids are able to do it. Not only able to do it, but able to take care of each other. And I just want to show you that under the tutelage of Walter Isengard, this amazing educator, the boys in Boy Home 101 set up what they call the Republic of Schkid. And I think this is a lesson to kids today, to people today. Here we are, we have a bunch of kids who are thrown into a ghetto just because they're different, because they're Jews. And they say, we're all going to take care of each other. Each one of us is responsible for the other. The adults don't need to step in. We're mature enough to do this for ourselves. And look what they say. They make this anthem. Oh, what glory, all are cheering, the whole of one, Boys Home 101, is on its feet. Government is coming to being of the Republic of Schkid. Every man is our brother, Christian or Jewish kid. What a nice thing, what a beautiful things for these kids to say. United we march under the banner of the Republic of Schkid. Insult us, no one shall dare to hit. To work hard, we swear to honor the Republic of Schkid. And one of those brilliant kids who we're going to talk about is a little boy called Petra Keen. And Petra Keen, I can go on, I can do a whole lecture only about Petra Keen. Brilliant boy from Prague, very open family. His mother wasn't Jewish, but she converts to Judaism. His family were active, what are they called? Wait, I'm having a senior moment again. The language, universal language. I'll think of it in a minute. The grave is in the, thank you. The parents were avid Esperantists. That's where they meet each other. He remembers an amazing Esperantist from Africa who comes to his house, and the whole family speaks Esperanto. The parents speak Esperanto. He's a very enriching, nurturing environment. This is a really good kid. He's sent by himself to Theresienstadt, and this Wunderkind, this brilliant kid, takes part in one of the great newspapers I think of the 20th century. A bunch of little boys all over the ghetto. There's different examples of this. We have the most of this one example called Vedem. Vedem was a children's magazine made by the little boys in the ghetto in the Boys Home 101. And it was the longest lasting clandestine magazine in the history of World War II. More than 80 handwritten or typed, one copy only. And he's the editor. And what do a bunch of little boys in this terrible place want to write about? There's jokes, there's silly recipes, there's beautiful essays. Petra Keen has what he calls Ghetto Rambles. He goes around the ghetto and he interviews people. When I guide groups in Theresienstadt, he's our guide. I use his writings. I use the writings of these little boys to help us understand what we're seeing. And there's beautiful poetry, heartbreaking poetry. There's cynical, stuff that kids write. All of this stuff in this magazine called Vedem. They would meet once a week secretly on the bed of one of the boys. Each one would read out what he wrote. A boy would be on the door, making sure no one looked in to see what was happening. Catch them while they're at it, because that could lead to fatal consequences. And here's one of the covers he makes for Vedem. And I love this, because look at it. How do you fight back against the Nazis? We have this magazine, which is Venom itself. Venom is Czech for in the lead. And it's blowing up this balloon that says in Czech, old world order. Here, these young kids are gonna blow it up, the old world order, make a new world with what? The cannonballs say in Czech, mirth, satire, and laughter. With our goodwill and our youth and our ability to laugh and see a future, and that's how we're going to create a new world. And these little boys, just to show you something briefly, what kind of kids these were. Pepik Joseph Sani, who was one of their teachers, writes about how these boys should take care of the old people on the streets, that they're like your grandmother who sent somewhere to the east, and now here they are, and it's up to us to protect them. And he says, but age is not a taboo for us. Somewhere in Poland, the old, sick, starving, abandoned mother of yours remembers, let us regard these old people with the affectionate look of our childhood. Let us refresh them with our youthful smile. Let us support them with the strength of our manhood. The aged from Germany, the starving, the abandoned. That's what these kids are trying to do. They're trying to be the light in the ghetto of helping elderly people, helping each other. They were just an amazing group of kids. And this brilliant artist, Petra Keen, who's also a writer and keeps a diary, and draws more than 100 drawings in the ghetto. He loves making linoleum cuts. Also, he writes a whole thing about linoleum cuts and how once you make if you don't know what a linoleum cut is, people, you take a piece of linoleum and you carve out all the places that are going to be white. You kind of carve it out. Any place that's going to be black, you can see here on this train, you leave in place, and then you ink it. And you put it on a piece of paper and you print it. It's a difficult technique. It's very precise. He writes about that. There's Petra Keen. And these are some of the drawings this little boy who's 14 when he arrives in the ghetto draws. I love this drawing of these flowers kind of staring out the window, looking on the scene of misery. And there they are, these flowers kind of looking at it all. They have their own presence. Looks like they've been picked from a field near the ghetto. Very, very mature and beautiful for a 14-year-old boy to draw. And this one, of the little moment, for those of you, when you're in a dark room and there's that little moment when light kind of comes in and illuminates everything very briefly. And if you're a cat, you want to sit in that light. And you could just admire it, and you could tell the time of the day as the light goes by. And there it is in the attic where the clothes are drying, and he gets that little glimmer of the light. This one also, this is a 15-year-old boy, 14-year-old boy who's making this work. It's the moon kind of on the bridge, one of the bridges leading out of the camp. Some of these kids are working in the fields. They have to work in the fields. He captures that moment in this very mature, beautiful work. Another thing these little boys feel is they're lonely. They're homesick for Prague. They're homesick for their home. They're homesick for their city. They're homesick for the places of their youth, even though most of them, by the time they arrive in Terezin, the Nazis had cut off most of that city to them, but they still miss it a lot. And Petra Keen writes this poem about remembering Prague, his beautiful city that he'll never see again. And he says, it's been such a long time and no one really remembers me, and life is still going on. I can still hear all of the noises and everything. And then he concludes with, for a year I've been stuck in an ugly hole. Instead of your beauties, I've a few streets alone. Like a wild animal trapped in a cage, I remember you, Prague, my fairy tale of stone. And he creates this drawing from memory. And I've actually been to his house in Terezin. I haven't been in Prague. I haven't been up, but I know where it is. And it's pretty much, if you were on the floor where he lived, this is what you would see. And here's this little boy who's missing everything, missing his family, missing his city, missing normalcy, drawing from memory, his home. And I just want to show you this picture from Prague. You can see kind of how precise it is. And poor Petra Keen was murdered in Auschwitz at the age of 16. He went directly to the gas chambers. This is his house in Prague. Here's the little Stoppelsteiner commemorating his life. Another little girl, another brilliant artist, let's see what time it is this little girl, Helga Vaisova. She survives, thank God. I'm happy to have one opportunity not to tell you they died in Auschwitz. And I believe she's still alive in Prague today. I told you last week about my dear friend Jana. I think Jana knows her. And when they arrive in the ghetto, by the way, if you have a chance, read her brilliant diary. The diary is amazing. Her artwork is incredible. She makes this when she's 12. When she arrives in the, and by the way, it's a picture from the museum in Terezin. When she arrives, this little talented 12-year-old girl, she makes this drawing. She's drawing and painting of a snowman and kids playing with the snowman. She shows it to her father. Father tells her, don't draw that. Draw what you see. Bear witness. Draw what you see. Don't draw fantasies. Don't draw snowmen. Don't draw beautifully dressed children. Show us what you see. And that's when she embarks on this mission to draw what she's seeing in the ghetto. As a young teenager, 12, 13, 14, there's a freshness to what she's seeing. She's unaware of great art movements. She's unaware of, how to create art. She's drawing it from her heart. She's drawing it from her own experience, which makes it incredibly powerful. Here people are scavenging in the garbage, standing in line in front of the kitchen, having to wait in line. Mama's no longer cooking. You no longer have any say in what you eat. You're barely getting enough food to eat, standing in line in front of the kitchen. This is her version of those beds. Can you imagine having all these kids having to live in those horrible cramped conditions as well? This is the views of a child. I'm going to leave this poem. I think I read it last time. But one of the forces that people always remember from Theresienstadt is the amazing teacher, Friedel Dicker Brandeis. And those of you who have been to Prague and have been to the Pinkas Synagogue, and that's the one with all the names of the Jews who were murdered, and then went up to the attic and saw the beautiful artwork created by children, Friedel Dicker Brandeis was the art teacher. Now, my colleagues at the wonderful Jewish Museum of Prague have created this beautiful site, Misha Seidenberg, shout out to you, about Friedel. So I'm going to direct you to really look into her life on this wonderful site they set up. You can see how to find it, Jewish Museum. But she's an art teacher in a nutshell. She's an art teacher. She's a philosopher. She loves children. She's an educator. She's an artist. She's from Vienna. She studies in the Bauhaus with Eaton, one of the great art teachers of that great movement. And she gets herself in trouble for being too political, and she escapes to Prague. And in Prague, she's drawing, she's creating art. Look at this beautiful drawing she makes, Still Life with Toys and Children's Drawing, Prague, 1937. How many artists do we know want to put in a children's drawing into their artwork? Draw toys. It's such a beautiful drawing. And when she's eventually sent to Theresienstadt, to cut her long story short, she begins to teach art to children. She wants them to be able to cope with what they're going through. And she knows that art is an amazing coping tool. Today, we consider her one of the pioneers of what will become art therapy. And she sets up classes to teach children art. And her main goal is just to give of herself, to give kids a way of escaping, a way of creating. She doesn't want to interfere. She doesn't want to direct little hands how to draw. She wants to give them the freedom and the guidance to create art. This is amazing. And I just want to show you 3 examples. Again, I'm very thankful to the Jewish Museum of Prague, who has the largest collection in the world of children's art, which was actually found after she was sent away to Auschwitz, after she followed her husband. Her husband was sent first. She follows him in October on her own volition. In October 1944, murdered probably upon arrival. The night before she's sent away, she hides almost 5,000 pieces of children's art in suitcases they're found after the war. So Ruth Gutmanova, just to show you what kind of teacher she was, creates this fantasy, this underworld fantasy. She was murdered by, I think, 13 or 14. But under the tutelage of Friedel, look at the freedom here. This is what the sea looks like. She's probably never even seen the sea. Czech Republic is whatchamacallit, doesn't have a sea coast. And here she makes this fantasy of what the beautiful sea must look like. This little boy, Hannes Pearl, who was murdered also in Auschwitz, he was also about 10, 11 years old, missing home. 1932, he's 10, missing home. And just look at this drawing. Those of you who work with children, we have the dog chasing the cat. We have kids playing with the train. We have books. We have a big thing of food. Someone's cooking. There's a clock. All of these things, missing home so much. Here he is stuck in the ghetto. And she allowed children to explore their dreams and their fantasies and their fears. Look at this drawing by Dora Zdekauer. Those of you who saw the invitation, this is the drawing from the invitation, so I had to fit it in. it's a princess or a little girl who's being threatened by some kind of horrible, it's like a dragon, and she's got this black cloud around her, and we are maybe protecting her. We don't know because we can't ask her. This poor little thing was murdered in Auschwitz also in 1944. But to create art with kids, most of these children did not survive. To want to give them an outlet, to want to give them a way, it's an amazing thing. And she was an incredible educator. And she herself, even though she did do some artwork in Terezin, not like before, she kind of dedicated herself to the kids, she didn't sign her work there. But every single one of these children, she asked them to sign their work, and usually how old they are. Most of these children didn't survive. This is their tombstone. This is what remains behind. And as we run, are we still okay for time? Do I have time for one or two more?
So we will not take questions, but we will love to hear the one or two more, and then people can ask you later.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm just going to show one more thing, the Bialystok children, because it's also one of these forgotten episodes that happens in Terezin. What happened was this: the Jews rise up in Bialystok, Poland. And there is an uprising there, which, you know, again, many people don't know that so many ghettos of Jews rose up against the Nazis, all of it to no avail, all of it knowing they wouldn't succeed. And apparently, some kind of deal had been struck. The Nazis thought they might be able to exchange children for German soldiers' lives. So an offer is given to some of these desperate parents who survived the uprising, who know they're probably going to be sent to Treblinka, where most of these people were, that their children might have a chance. They could be exchanged. Show me a mother who wouldn't jump at that chance, knowing that Treblinka is the other option. The children are sent to Terezin. Those who remember this, again, this is another event that anyone who was around at the time remembers, and people wrote about it, that everyone was forced into their homes. No one was allowed out. No one was allowed to look in the window. And a group, as we hear from Hannah Greenford, of bedraggled children appeared, hundreds of them between the ages of 4 to 12 years old, holding each other's hands. The older ones helped the small ones, their little bodies moving along in the pouring rain, column of marching ghosts with wet rags, emaciated bodies. The children were led to a building and where disinfection and delousing of inmates was performed. Suddenly they started to shout and cry, gas, gas, gas. They huddled together, refusing to be washed or to have their wet clothing changed for dry clothing. Nobody understood the children's reaction. What kind of children were these? Where did they come from? What were they talking about? At that point, people still didn't know that being deported to the East meant death. The opposite, in Auschwitz, they actually have in 1944, they have a campaign to send letters back from Auschwitz to Theresienstadt. Hi, we've just arrived, everything is great, waiting to see you. So people don't quite know what's happening there. And that's why the children were kept in secret, away from everyone else, so they wouldn't be able to tell them, hey, we've just come from Bialystok and they're gassing people. Not that most of the people in the ghetto would have been able to understand them, because these kids spoke Yiddish, they spoke Polish. They came from a very different kind of background than most of the people in Terezin, Czech Jews and Danish Jews, we'll talk about them later, etc. Anyway, 5 artists draw the same scene. 5 artists. This one is Leo Haas, The Bialystok Children, 1943. I think his is the most touching. Look at these little souls. Look at these little kids, like little babies, walking through. The big SS man standing over them, deliberately much bigger than they are. You know, what does he need that gun for these poor little children? There's a guard standing there. There's those big walls, looking, peeking through, or people watching them coming in, wondering who these kids are. Ernst Morgenstern, the one who the artist who's not really an artist, but not a trained artist, but he feels compelled to draw, also draws these children coming in. You see the policeman standing there not letting people watch. You see these bedraggled children. Notice how he portrays this child in the front. Even though he's a child, he has an adult face. He's seen so much already. And Pavel Fanzel, right, the humorist who made that drawing of Christmas in Theresienstadt, also draws them coming in, illuminated by the light of the policeman's lamp coming into the ghetto. And Helga Vaisova, the little girl whose work I just showed you, also shows us these children coming in. These are her contemporaries. These are kids who are a little bit younger than her. Look how they're dressed. Look at these poor kids. Where are they from? What's their story? And we can see the policemen holding the crowds back so no one can talk to them and no one can find out what happened to them. And one last artist, Otto Unger, also one of the artists who was murdered because of his artwork, also portrays the children coming in. We have 5 artists portraying the same thing. What happened to these kids? They were in the ghetto for about a month. They got healthier. They got good food. They began to fatten up a little bit. The plan was to send them on an exchange to Palestine, and they say the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem would not have these Jewish kids come to Palestine. He didn't want them coming in to mandatory Palestine, and in the end, the children were sent to Auschwitz. Here is the transit list, the names of these little kids. Hannah Greenfeld, who spent 50 years researching these children, her mother was one of the nurses who was sent, took care of the children. She was among the staff, 53 staff who were sent to Auschwitz together with the kids. Remember I showed you that list of transports. So here we see transport DN only had 1,196. Those are the amount of children. Another transport probably attached to that. 53 of the staff were sent to Auschwitz. Most of the children were murdered. A few of the staff members survived. And it happens on Yom Kippur, 1943. The only photograph we have of any of these kids is Hannah Greenfeld did a lot of research, managed to find a woman called Masha, who was one of these mothers who wanted to get her child out for any cost, get her out of the ghetto, send her somewhere else and not to Treblinka. Masha actually survived. Her husband did not survive, and her little girl, Deborah, did not survive. The picture of Deborah is the only photograph we have in existence that we know of any of these children. It's also one of the stories of Theresienstadt that most people don't know. The Red Cross visit, maybe we'll do another talk because I don't have time for the Red Cross visit. But I just want to say this in why I think it's so important that we remember this place. It happened so many years ago. We're entering a new generation with its new service, its new problems. It's hard to remember. Every single person I showed you here deserves something, deserves to remember they once lived on the planet. Every single human being deserves that. The fact that they still tried to live with dignity, the fact that they tried to fight back in the only way possible. A witness to what happens when hatred and silence and indifference is allowed to run rampant, when people use the art of deception, words, false images to fool people. All of these things wrap up in the story of Theresienstadt. So I think it's so vitally important to remember it, to tell it correctly, and to remember these artists. So thank you, everybody. That's me.
Thank you, Liz. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Oh, Marion, hi, thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Thank
I
you
would
so
miss you.
much.
I miss you too.
Liz has many admirers from around the world, and already we have some requests for part 3. So
I'm always, if we have nothing to do, this Corona, I'd be happy to do a part 3. I still got more to talk about.
I'm sure, and we are just in Theresienstadt. We can move to many other spaces around Europe. But Liz, thank you so much for
thank you so much, everyone.
Really immense knowledge and your sensitivity, the way you enrich us with stories and knowledge, and use art and writing in understanding a complex and you know, a complex story that we are still struggling to many times understand fully. What we will do, everyone, if you have questions, if you have things that you would like to research more or read more, please do not hesitate to write to us. We will send it all to Liz, and she can be in touch with you or answer some questions or send some resources to you. And you are very, you know, we will keep in touch with Liz. Thank you to everyone for coming. And please do join us. We have another webinar on Sunday at 4 o'clock. And this time it's to end the 100 days of the genocide in Rwanda. Day of Independence is actually the 4th of July, and we will commemorate that day on the 5th of July with Professor David Simon from Yale University, and he'll speak about lessons from Rwanda. So we hope that we will see you. Thank you, Liz, very much, and thank you all for joining, and have a lovely, lovely evening, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.